Hey friends, welcome back to Holy Ourselves, a podcast about becoming more authentic in our faith, especially related to our sexuality and our gender. And I am here with a dear friend, Lynn Melone. Hello, Lynn.
Hello,
Gosh.
Josh.
On the good old Life on Side B, you were the most featured guest. And it's no wonder because I just love talking to you.
Well, I'm honored and I love talking to you too, so that works.
That works. You also got to be, you were also on my mini series podcast, The
That's
Becoming
right.
Whole.
hmm
Yeah, see, you appear everywhere. Uh, bef- Before we get into our conversation for today, I want to let everyone know that, as always, you can support this podcast by becoming a patron. Fun note I've been saying over the past while, third tier patrons, you get to see some of the drafts of stuff I've been working on. Notably, that I'm really trying to finish this book. Gosh. And I've been sharing like little bits to get people's stuff on. And normally the sharing it's normally quarterly, but because I'm in a writing session right now, I've been sharing something every month. So would appreciate if you come join patreon.com/holy ourselves, and as little as $5 a month, and it helps do this stuff. We're here to talk about intentional community. Before that, because there are some people that listen to this podcast a lot that haven't listened to Life on Side B, don't listen to Life on Side B. Could you share a little bit about yourself for anyone who hasn't gotten to hear your lovely voice?
Sure. So I am a member of an intentional community in San Francisco called Church of the Sojourners. I am side B. I was in a mixed orientation marriage for 25 years, and I have a 33-year-old son. I have been divorced for about 15 years now. And I came out as queer when I was 34 years old and had a 3-year-old and was in a marriage. And that was a long journey. But after the marriage ended, I eventually made my way to the community I live in now. And I've been here for 10 years.
10 years. Wow. It's a beautiful community y'all have. So, and that's related to what we're talking about.
Yes, it is. At 10 years, I'm one of the newer members. The community's been around for more than 30 years.
Okay. Yeah. Because I guess that makes sense. Because when I first interviewed you on Life on Side B about this same topic, intentional community,
hmm
let me see, that would have been 2019. So you would have been like more in third or fourth year
Right.
of it, probably at the time. Wow. Yeah. So it's a very established community.
Very much so. It was
Yeah.
started
And
in the 1980s by a group of university grads and two Baptist missionary families who are ministering to the Central American refugee community in San Francisco.
oh, right. Because, yeah, to clarify for people, because I think a lot of people that maybe aren't familiar with different Christian intentional communities, it is a church that is also an intentional community, right?
Right. And the intentional communities don't always serve as churches, obviously,
Yeah.
but we are sort of an expanded house church model. So we own 4 houses in the same neighborhood, all within a few blocks of each other. We live together, and we also come together in one of our houses for worship every Sunday. So we are both a community and a church.
And church. Yeah. And then you have people that are in the church that maybe don't live there, correct?
Correct. We have
Yeah.
different kinds of members. So we have covenant members who are committed lifelong to this community, live together, share a common purse, share other kinds of commitments. And that's sort of the hardcore.
Yeah.
And then we have people on the path to becoming covenant members in different ways, and I can talk about that later. But we also have people who won't be covenant members. Either they won't live with us for one reason or another, or they can't commit to the full commitment of covenant members. For example, we have guest members who, because of family commitments, don't live with us. Either they live with their elderly parents, or they spend some time with family who lives out of San Francisco, or things like that. So we call them guest members. When they're in town or when they're with us, they worship with us, but they don't live with us. And
Yeah.
then we have other kinds of other members who just show up occasionally on Sundays, and just treat us as their church, but aren't really wrapped up in the life of the intentional community as much.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
on a Sunday, we're still very small. There are 18 of us that live together, and we have maybe 20 to 25 on a Sunday.
So in other words, you're not trying to become a mega church in this situation.
Oh my, no.
No. This is not about the number increase of regular attendance,
The biggest the church ever was about 50 people.
which that feels big for, I mean, you have four houses, but, and
Mhm.
again, you're saying that it's not everyone's living there, but I guess that, yeah.
Right.
Wow.
And for a number of reasons, most of those people have moved on. You know, some of them have passed on
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
they were the older generation. I'm one of the older members in our community now. In
Okay.
fact, there's only one person older than, no, two people older than I am.
Okay.
One covenant member and one guest member who actually started out with the community a long time ago, but then spent a good time teaching in Taiwan and only comes back on vacations. And now
Yeah.
is retired. But so, yeah, it's been bigger and it's been smaller. It got down to about 10 people, and then it started to have a slight uptick in the past few years.
Oh, okay. Which kind of relates a little bit to what I wanted us to talk about because I had, for everyone, I had asked Lynn to come on because I had read this article. I can't even remember where it was, but obviously there's been, I feel like I hear it all the time. Like the amount of times I hear people that get in a group chat with their best friends and they look at a like room mansion
Uh-huh.
and they just start dreaming about buying it together is like
Hmm.
a regular occurrence, especially
Hmm.
with millennials like myself.
Hmm.
And so there's a craving for like intentional community, communal living that has really shot up. I feel like has really, really shot up lately. That's what this article was talking about. But in general, statistically, and I'm sorry, y'all, I don't actually have the source of the statistic, but it was in the thing, was talking about that in general, 90% of intentional communities do fail. Does that
Hmm.
sound right to you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But then it was also saying that some things, and I don't know, maybe COVID plays a part into it. Maybe there's just obviously a lot of the divisions that we have in our world today, that there's been increasing more things. So I wanted us to kind of talk a little bit more today about intentional community. Maybe for some people, this is
Hmm.
the first time they're hearing about it in general. But anyone who has followed my podcasting journey has either heard you or others, and we've talked about it. And now there's been a lot more stuff. But I guess one question I had for you is now having been maybe in your community for longer, even though I know you said you're not the longest, uh, how can you share how your relationship has evolved with intentional community? Like,
Sure.
because 10
Yeah.
years is not a small time.
No, but I lived in my first intentional community in college,
Oh, okay.
which was 40 years ago.
Okay.
So my journey with intentional community has taken a lot of turns. So
Yeah.
when I was a college student at UC Santa Cruz, there was an intentional community of students connected to the campus ministry. And I
Mm,
lived in that for about 2.5 years. And that was intended as a temporary community, whereas my
okay.
community now is a permanent community. And those are two different things. And I think most communities that start up are intended as temporary. And that's fine. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of them die, because they serve their purpose and then
Yeah.
people move on. Frequently due to marriage, frequently or to children coming along. As hard as it is to be married, it's even harder to be married in community. You're sort of in a fishbowl, and everyone you live with is involved. And so that's not an
Yeah.
easy thing.
Yeah.
We sometimes joke that our community is sort of like being married to 8 different people, none of whom you get to sleep with.
In some ways, it is. It really, because you're going through the same relational kind of
Yeah,
issues.
yeah, in some ways it is. Now, to be clear, we do have one straight married couple in our community,
Hmm.
and they are not celibate, but all of
Yeah.
this, the rest of us who are single are.
Hmm.
So, so I was in intentional community in college, and then I was married for 25 years, and we had people live with us most of that time.
Hmm.
And then I was aware of this community. It was actually started by college friends of mine. They were some of the university people that did it. And
Yeah.
so I had volunteered with the community and was familiar with them. But then we moved off to DC and we didn't stay in the Bay Area. So when I was single again, and I knew that I wanted to live in community, I lived alone for about 3 years and I hated it. So I knew I wanted to live in community and I was aware of this community. So I came back as an apprentice. So our community has a membership process for joining. We don't ask you to go all in right away. The
Hmm.
first year is an apprenticeship year, and you have limited commitments. And they usually take apprentices, we usually take apprentices as a group. So I was an apprentice with two other people, young people. I came when I was 54, and the two of them, their ages didn't even add up to that. So it was interesting.
Yeah.
So I was an apprentice for a year, and then the next year, if you decide to stay, you become what's called a practicing member. And I was a
Okay.
practicing member for a year. And then after that, if you decide to stay, you move into more and more commitments of the community. And it's called your novice year. And you do a novice year.
Hmm.
And then if you decide that you're in for good, if you want to make a permanent commitment to the full life of the community, then you become what's called a covenant member. So as I moved through the membership process, other people were moving along with me. Neither of the other two people who were apprentices with me ended up making a covenant commitment,
Okay.
although they could still come and visit.
Hmm.
And I knew when I came back that I wanted to settle for good. So I was sort of on
Hmm.
the fast track. Often people spend several years as practicing members and a year or two as novice members, and maybe go off and take sort of a sabbatical for a year and come back and things like that. But since then, we've had one more person join as a covenant member, and she
Okay.
also took the fast track 4 years. She had lived in a previous community, and
Mm.
so knew kind of what she was getting into, and she's our
Yeah.
newest covenant member. And then my Revoice chapter co-leader has did his apprenticeship year last year
Oh,
and is staying on as a practice member.
that's
So
amazing.
it is
Love that.
amazing. Yeah, it was an interesting connection of two of my communities. So
Because does the chapter meet at your guys' house?
no,
No.
we meet in the South Bay at his old church, actually.
Mm.
So
Okay.
we were meeting at his church, and then he joined our church, but we had already, had a footprint at that church in the South Bay.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I
Mhm.
knew from a very young age, college, I knew as a college student that I was committed to the ideals of living in community.
Mhm.
Read Bonhoeffer with InterVarsity and that whole thing.
Mhm.
And also, I had been exposed to intentional communities in my college career, both, the one that I was in, and it was sponsored by an organization called the Resource Center for Nonviolence in Santa Cruz,
Mm.
which was a peace and justice center and had commitments to solidarity with the poor and immigrant, and had the sort of Catholic worker vibe of community where community was not just for yourselves, it was for the larger community. It was to carry out kingdom work. So
Mhm.
so that those values were in me, fairly young, but then I got married and he did not share some of those values. And
Okay.
so I came back to it when I was single again.
Yeah. It really, like what you're naming there is a really big thing because I feel like you have like intentional communities, like your community, and especially communities where you are living in a home together. These are like really almost communal living on steroids in many ways because
Mhm.
because you're sharing everything. You're
Mm,
you're sharing bills, you're
mhm.
sharing lives, you're sharing kitchens. I think one of my biggest was it you or Meg Bots? Because I interviewed you guys back to back in those first two episodes. But one of you said like if you want to know, one of you two said something that has stuck with me about how if you want to know how you're doing relationally, look at your kitchen or something. And
I think that was Meg. Yeah, but
okay,
he's
probably
not
Meg.
wrong.
Yeah, but going back to the whole thing, it really is a true thing that marriage also really
Hmm.
kind of shakes some of this up in how you relate to communal living. But also, there's a lot of varying kind of degrees of communal living
Hmm.
beyond intentional community and maybe like a suburban American home where you're just like in a home completely separate from everyone.
Hmm. And I think, especially for celibate queer people, a lot of different types of communal living have become more common, which I'm happy to see. There's, the sort of adopt a queer where a conventional family has one celibate queer
Yeah.
person live with them as sort of honorary aunt or uncle, or what's the gender neutral term for that? They have one.
Oh, I don't know
Anyway,
actually.
family member.
Yeah.
And so that's one, to be adopted into a more conventional family. Another is just housemates. And, queer folks have always been housemates. Boston marriages were a thing where
Hmm.
there were women living together who were not acknowledged as partners, but were partners. And, something for people of my generation that's coming up apparently as a trend is Golden Girls houses, where older,
Sign me up.
yes, Golden Boys. Anyway,
Yeah.
where older women are realizing that they can, live together and that there are a
Mm.
lot of advantages to that as opposed to moving into, say, a senior center or a senior citizen home. There's even a whole little tiny house village of mostly queer older women. I think it's in Florida, actually, that
Wow.
I read about recently. But I
Hmm.
think there, because so many institutions in our country are failing,
Mm.
churches are failing. Traditional, there was an old book called Bowling Alone about how sort of social organizations that held a previous generation together, like bowling leagues or sports leagues or the Elks Club or things like that. All of those are sort of dying out.
Even bars. I mean, we
Yes,
didn't never thought of them as institutions, but like
but yeah,
bars are dying out.
all kinds of community building institutions, even micro
Hmm.
institutions like bars,
Yeah.
are dying out. And so there's a gap for people who don't have strong biological or quasi biological godparent ties. There's a
Hmm.
huge gap, and it's part of what's contributing to the loneliness epidemic. Now, immigrant communities of color often have much stronger ties still.
Hmm.
But for most, sort of white identified or rootless, in a sense, people, middle class people who have some options about where they want to live and who are more likely to move for a job, there are big gaps in community. I think it's people who are coming out of college and looking around and saying, hey, who are my neighbors? Who
Yeah.
is going to be there for me? And
Yeah.
to some extent, who can I be there for? Because one of the needs that intentional community
Hmm.
meets is not just, who's going to take care of me, but meaning that there is a group of people that I'm committed to. And with people marrying later and later, there's a bigger gap between high school or college graduation and
Yeah.
potential marriage. And so people are staying single longer and realizing they have more time to realize they're lonely in a sense. And so I think
Hmm.
those are some of the things that are feeding the the interest in community, if not the ability to commit.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense because I would say even in our like in my church community, which isn't an intentional community, but I would say we do community together often, people in varying degrees. Like Christian and I bought our house because it is close to people in the church. Like,
Mhm.
multiple people are in walking distance or at least a scooter distance. I can scoot over for 2 minutes to get to someone.
Mhm.
And I think I think something I've noticed is often as people move into professional life or married life, there becomes the tension between like convenience and like relationship. And what I
Mhm.
mean by that is there's the convenience of living by yourself when you can now pay for an apartment by yourself. There's
Mhm.
a convenience of or maybe when you get married and you two both can now afford a home together, or a convenience of getting an Uber instead of asking a friend to come and pick you up, that often is helpful, but then we find ourselves more and more isolated. And so you have this group of people who the need is very real, like what you're saying. The gap between getting out of high school and getting married or starting a job is much wider, and so the need for it is much more apparent in some ways. And I guess kind of connected to that, you mentioned it a little bit, but I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the there seems to be almost like a real pull for queer people towards intentional communities. Anything more you would say about that and specifically?
Well, obviously, for many years, marriage wasn't an option for queer folks. And so chosen family has always been really important to the survival of queer communities. And this is just another form of chosen family in some
Yeah.
ways. And I think that given the language of intentional community and given models for intentional community, it becomes very, very attractive, both to people who, even to queer folks who are married, and especially to queer folks who don't intend to marry, that because there aren't those supports, social supports that are provided by marriage and the other kinds of social supports that intentional community can provide, even less informal things like co-housing or
Hmm.
long-term roommates. It doesn't have to necessarily be Christian community
Hmm.
because there are all kinds of types of communities that are springing up for one reason or another.
Yeah.
Even co-working is a form of community. And
Hmm.
these, co-working places that are springing up in urban where people just come and bring their laptops and have a place to
Yeah.
work around other people, that's a symbol of the need for community and the recognition of that we are more interdependent. But what you were calling convenience is a form of independence.
Mm. Hmm.
And, the American ethic is so be independent that it feels very good and freeing at first, at least, to be able to be, especially when you're moving out of your parents or moving out of college, to be independent. But it is an isolating kind of freedom. It's a freedom
Hmm.
from, not a freedom for. And it gets thin after a while.
Yeah.
So that I think hits people later than
Hmm.
back in the 90s there was sort of a surge of intentional community, most of it coming out of college students coming out of various Christian community, Christian ministry type things that said, okay, what are we going to do now? Like a little bit
Hmm.
earlier than that, it was sort of a missions. When you
Mm.
graduated from college, if you're a Christian, you went into the mission field. And then for a while, if you graduated from college, you might do urban missions, and that might involve some kind of community living. But now it seems that that sort of trend has died down a little bit, and there's a bigger gap between your college ministry and when you eventually are willing to commit to a community.
Yeah. It is interesting. I mean, again, I'm not speaking on research or anything in this way, but I feel like what has always been fascinating is intentional community has always felt very tied to Christian roots. Maybe not fully, but very much connected. Like it was hard to be in intentional community circles without overlapping with Christian stuff in some way, or other communities that were specifically, like you said, designed around a church or around faith in some way. And what I find really fascinating is a lot of that I see now of conversations around intentional community feel very secular, separate from that. Like the people that I engage with, except for queer people, because or like individuals, yes, but when it comes to more broader faith conversations, I actually don't hear intentional community talked about as much as I feel like back in the wave that you were talking about when it was like more ingrained
Mhm.
in it. Do you feel that way? Maybe.
I think so. I think a lot of the communitarian language that's coming out is coming out from secular sources, and it's coming
Hmm.
out as part of this wave of studying the epidemic of loneliness and what can we do about
Hmm.
that. And also coming out of COVID, where people were either forced into intense community or completely isolated.
Yeah.
People have realized they need something in between, that it's not good to be isolated, but
Mhm.
it's not quite that comfortable to be as close as some of us were forced to be. So, for example, my
Wow.
son lived with us during COVID, and after coming out of it, he said, Mom, I never want to share a wall, a bathroom, or a kitchen with anyone ever again. And so he lives in a little ADU. Now,
Oh.
if he ever marries, that might be something else, but he's very happy where he is. But his form of community is networking through work and going to things like Silent Book Club and, finding sort of online and spontaneous and low commitment forms of community.
Mhm.
And I think that's part of what's playing into our social milieu right now is that younger people, people in their 20s and so, are looking for commitment on their own terms. So between FOMO and the fact that every institution around them is dying, they're very skeptical and wary of committing to anything. They want to taste things, but they don't want to stay for the whole meal.
Yeah.
And so they want to taste it. It's like food truck parks. You don't want to go to one restaurant. You're going to go to 15 just to see, maybe I get a little something here and a little something there, but I don't want to be
Mhm.
limited into one thing for, the rest of my life.
Which is hard then
Yep.
for intentional community because that is literally what it is.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Well, okay, so then let's go move into that because that goes into a little bit of what I was talking about, that there's this wave of desire for it.
Hmm.
But obviously, even before COVID, intentional communities died very often. Like you said, like
Hmm.
maybe that's what they were meant to be, was temporary. But can you speak into maybe what you think, maybe whether you've experienced it in your community or around others, or what helps communities work
Hmm.
actually like succeed, or
Hmm.
maybe things that play into it not succeeding?
Let's do the problem issues first. So
Okay.
I think part of it is generational. I think, as I mentioned just a second ago, younger people are less likely to be willing to make long-term commitments when
Mm,
they're young. The marriage age shifting up to, mid 30s now is the average in America for marriage. I think that's another thing that's being reflected in intentional communities. We have one of the communities in our community network has shifted from year-long apprenticeship or volunteers to 3-month volunteers because they
okay.
were finding that a year was too long for
Wow.
people to commit to, and that even 3 months, some people are now asking, can I just come for a month? Can I try it out?
Wow.
Can I try it out? Whereas for people who are in the community already, to have a constant revolving door of people coming in and out is very wearing. So
Hmm.
there's this tension. I mean, we've talked about should our apprenticeship be less than a year but just having people come in and out even on a yearly basis is difficult, especially for the families that have kids. To have those people, rotate in and out of your family is complicated.
All right.
I think so. Part of that is the shift in the willingness to commit in younger people. Another is for older people who might commit to a community. People's economic futures are so uncertain right now.
Oh my
It
gosh.
used to be that you could sort of commit to a community and know that Social Security will at least have my minimum. I won't become a burden on the community if I join when I'm older. But who knows now? So people are a little bit more wary of making
Hmm.
commitments where they have to be economically tied to other people because everybody's economic future is so uncertain. So
So
that's
uncertain.
part of it too. And then I think another reason is just that people are more and more aware of the difficulties of relationships in general. We are a therapy generation at this point. Well, all of us, all of our generations. And I was
Yeah.
talking to one of my friends, and they said people used to go to their friends for things they go to therapists now for, just to have
Hmm.
someone to talk. And the idea that sort of you can buy your community, you can have online friends that you choose, and you can have a therapist that you choose, and those can fill a lot of your relational needs. Whereas in the past, You were stuck with the people you actually knew.
That was it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the idea that the choices, it's sort of the the Amazoning of social relationships. You can get it
Yeah.
online faster. You can get it online exactly what you want, and you don't have to compromise. You don't have
Yeah.
to deal with a two-way relationship. It's all
Hmm.
just a matter of choice. And we're so used to that in so many areas of our life that it's affecting the way we deal with relationships.
I I think that that's especially what I was trying to get at with the convenience like aspect, because
Hmm.
it's also like the commodification
Yeah.
of the village, I've heard it called,
Yep.
where it's like the things that the village would have given you
Hmm.
now have been commodified in every realm, whether it is
Yep.
like, trips to Ubers to the airport, whether it's your therapist,
Hmm.
like kind of being the person you go to, whether all of these aspects. And I think also playing within the American culture
Hmm.
of we don't, the independent side, we hate to owe people
Yes.
things.
Hmm.
So to have someone do something for you without automatically like giving them gas money
Hmm.
or promising that you're going to do the same thing for them,
Hmm.
like the hard part with community is you're doing it because you're in community.
Right.
And that doesn't feel great sometimes. I struggle with it because it's
Mhm.
sometimes like the times when I've had to take help from community where I know I'm not going to be able to give it back, maybe immediately, or
Mhm.
something. But it's having to remove the like tally in the
Mhm.
brain is so hard.
Yep. And that's interesting because one of the signs of hope, to kind of switch to the what helps at work or
Yeah.
signs of hope, one of the signs of hope that's coming out of the current political climate is the huge rise in mutual aid. And the
Mm,
idea that all around the country, there are these groups springing up that recognize we can't do this alone, whatever this is. We can't do it alone, and we need to be helping our neighbors, not because they can pay us back immediately, but because they're our neighbors.
yeah.
And because those kinds of things, whether it's dropping off diapers at a diaper bank for the community, or whether it's asking people to for help with yard work who picked up things from the diaper bank, that kind of genuine mutual aid is springing up often centered around immigrant communities, and often to the to the degree that I haven't seen before in political activism. I mean, look at
Mm.
Minneapolis, for example. The kinds
Oh my
of
gosh.
micro connections, the kind of hyper local connections that are happening that provide the resistance there have been sort of bubbling under the surface for a while. But right now, there are there are so many signal chats out there that are organizing all of these things on hyperlocal levels that it's really building a different kind of community that I've seen in all my years of activism. And that kind of willingness to support because we feel like to some extent there's a common enemy
Hmm.
is an interesting development to watch people's capacity for community. It's still on your own terms. It's still, you can do these things when it's convenient for you, when you're able. But the connections that builds just is a very hopeful sign to me. The
Yeah.
other thing I think that helps the longest running communities that I know of have a few things in common. One is a common work. So they're devoted to a particular neighborhood, or they have land that they take care of, or that they've been a series of ministries that they've been running for a long time. Those things, a common work really helps. A certain amount of size where you can have some fluctuations up and down. Little tiny one house intentional communities tend to fail much faster than
Mm.
ones that have built up, 20, 30, 50 people and can take some fluctuations over time a little bit better. And also, communities that require more of their people actually tend to have people stay longer, partly because it's self-selecting. If you're willing to go through our apprenticeship
Yeah.
program, you're pretty much, you're committed to certain things. Whereas the shorter term or the drop-in ones that don't ask very much of, say, their temporary volunteers, unless they're of a certain size, those temporary bonds don't hold very well. But so asking a pretty high level of commitment going in does tend to help longevity unless there's an explosion.
Yeah.
And a lot of communities die of explosions rather than, there's two ways to die. You can dwindle away or there can be an explosion of some kind.
Explode.
And explosions are unpredictable, sort of by their very nature. So, how to prevent one?
Yeah.
Just healthy relationships can help, but there's no guarantees. Just like marriage, there's no guarantees. Just
No.
like anything in life.
Yeah. I mean, it's the hard part about because like if you're because off I'm imagining it's like almost always going to be like a relational thing that ends up
Hmm.
being the explosion.
Hmm.
And the hard part of all relational dynamics are everyone has to be willing to come to the table.
Hmm.
Like, and everyone has to be willing to open up their heart in that way. And the willingness to do the really vulnerable work of deciding to come back together and to
Hmm.
work through it. And I think the more people you add, the more complex that gets in those
Right.
situations. You know, like at least in a marriage, you have two people,
Hmm.
but then sometimes it's like you have a 50-50 chance um, that both people are going to come together. But then I can imagine in community, you are asking everyone to come back together
Hmm.
in those kinds of moments.
To some extent, I mean, usually breakups are usually over money, sex, or power. And if it's sex, if somebody has an affair, for example, then the effects hit the whole community, but it's really just a couple of people that need to do the major reconciliation work. Whereas if it's something like a power dynamic, then everyone sort of needs to be in the conversations, and that can get a lot more complicated. So, and money, well, that's a whole other issue.
That's a whole thing. Yeah, I always appreciate your wisdom because I just think the world of you so much in all
Oh,
of this.
thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate it because I think there's even just so much, like even as someone who I'm not in an intentional community, but I do think that there is communal living aspects to how me and the reason I am where I'm at now and I'm not in South America
Hmm.
is because of the people here. And a lot of what you have said, I resonate with. Because not only is it within like the commitment of like Christian and I, but also then how we relate to our community. And like I said, buying the house because it's near people. And I've said this on the podcast before, but even this is a little bit more of like the social aspect of it, of how, well, okay, let me say this because I think one thing I've been processing is Christian became really interested in this podcast called Strong Towns, which probably many people have heard of. And it's all about how to redevelop towns
Hmm.
and cities for people.
Right.
Like, the ways that suburbia and kind of these things have like distanced us apart and all of the different kind of elements that go into that. And so when we live in a culture that for decades has been structuring cities around separateness,
Hmm.
around that convenience, it sometimes feels like the only solution is intentional community,
Hmm.
like living in a house together. Because even I was talking to one of the pastors at my church, Dan, who is Kenyan, and we were sitting in a, a restaurant with a neighborhood behind him. He was like, if we were in Kenya, everyone in that neighborhood would be my cousin.
Hmm.
He's like, I would be able to know everyone there because I'd be related to all of them in some form or fashion. I'd probably be able to tell you who they all are. But obviously, our society doesn't work that, and so to even redevelop the like social dynamic
Hmm.
aspects feels a lot. So that sometimes it feels like we need to like come together in the house because changing the culture just feels so daunting in many
Right.
ways. Hmm.
And I think I live in a neighborhood that's been a traditional Hispanic neighborhood for generations. And I work in my office with several people who grew up in the neighborhood. The idea that they do know everybody in the
Yeah.
neighborhood, they know everybody's cousins and everybody's somebody's cousin, if and that level of bonding together still exists in some neighborhoods, but in very few. And sort of the new urbanism, the move back to cities to try, in some case, with the result of gentrification, but in other cases, working for the redevelopment of the cities, has highlighted really the difference between existing relationships and sort of artificial or newly created relationships. And the ways those interact in urban settings has been really interesting to watch. But yeah, I think for a lot of people who have, for several generations, the impulse was to move away from your parents. Follow the job, get educated, and get up and get out. And so people got isolated. They ended up in cities where they have no roots. And I think right now that's reversing, especially since COVID. I've known so many people who are moving back to where their parents live because they know they need to take care of them, or they know they want their parents to be around to take care of their kids.
Yeah.
And I think as a society, we're reestablishing that value that, out of the 60s, it was, don't trust anybody over 30. Your parents will never understand you, blah, blah, blah. And I think to some extent, queer folks still have that experience a lot more than straight folks do, because frankly, most of the people I know who are moving back to deal with their parents are straight. And I think that reaffirmation of the good and the need for connection is a healthy thing, but I think it definitely affects different subcultures differently. And I think, again, folks in queer communities end up more often with chosen family than with biological family still. But I'm hoping that's changing. I think we're seeing at least a little bit of a shift toward acceptance between the generations, and that can only be healthy.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I resonate with that because I do believe I've seen that as well. And I think that's the hard part is like, I love that the people in your neighborhood, they know everyone because they've committed to that place. They've said, this is where I'm at, and there's so many forces that have shifted us away from that, but there's this draw towards. But yeah, as a queer person, it always feels weird. Like I only live an hour away from my family and my parents are great. But then obviously because of the things that happen when you're a queer person in a Christian family, I don't go there very much. And it feels weird to go there. It feels really odd to go back up to my hometown, which is so sad because I loved it. I thought it was going to be where I was going to be forever. And I love the town that we have made our home because it gives actually very many similar vibes to it, and it reminds me in really beautiful ways of my home, like my original community of origin. But yeah, it does become very complex in that way because I think we as a society are seeing that draw, but then obviously with these kind of circumstances, especially for queer people, the ways we can do so are differ in many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that also goes into like with this intentional community stuff, just how we pick what our community is going to be, our church in that way. Like I know so many queer people that nowadays, one of their stipulations for a church is like, I need a church that actually does life together, which is so hard to find.
Yep.
Yeah. And there's like so little ability often, or like, I think churches have actually lost what it means because they'll always be like, we're family. And I'm like, but are you?
Yeah.
Like, are you
And
really?
I think part of that is the megachurch and the commuter church models, because this is very different for a lot of Catholics, especially Catholic, because Catholics are still largely parish-based, and parish is a geography. And so
Like you don't pick it picks you by your
right.
location.
If you move into that parish, that's your parish. You're not going to go church shopping. That's where you are. And if you try to go someplace else, the priest there will go, hey, where's your parish? You're there. And so people in a parish tend to have more strong connections and more happen to see each other on the streets, their kids go to the same schools, that kind of thing. But Protestant evangelical churches aren't geographic at all. In most places, except for very small towns. And if you're driving half an hour to go to church, because you're not going to have any interaction with those people during the week, so you really can't do life together. And
Hmm.
because it's been that model for so long, it's really very difficult to find churches that do more than Sunday, at best Wednesday type of connections.
Yeah.
Now,
I was,
churches that have large sort of social ministries have get subgroups within it, like I help with the food pantry every week, or I help, or every month. Every week would
hmm
be ideal, but it's more likely every month. I
hmm
help with, the vacation Bible school once a year. I help with, and so there are limited connections, but seeing the same people multiple times a week is very rare.
yeah. I mean, I was just having a conversation with someone in our church who drives very far for it. And we were talking through how our approach to like discipleship and our approach to formation and kind of just some questions they had around it. And I think one of the things I realized in that conversation is how much in our church, like what you would call discipleship or formation, is relational, that's happening on, like, not on a Sunday night. It's
Hmm.
happening at dinner or like as things are happening. And so if you're commuting
Yeah.
from so far away,
Hmm.
it feels like there's nothing.
Right.
But you're right. It's so hard to. That's become the ingrained thing. Like I remember when I first moved back to the States, I drove in like 45 minutes for a church. You know, and obviously as a queer person, there's a lot of like things because I wish it could be that way. But then I'm like thinking of the nearbyest church, and I'm like, they would stone me. No, I'm joking. No, but like
Well,
legitimate. There's a scary thing of then there's obviously there's stuff you have to consider, but then there's
mhm.
also a point where you're just like, are you just church shopping at this moment? Like
Right.
rather than allowing to be in community with the people that are around you.
Yeah. And I think oddly, it comes from our acceptance of commuting for work. I think we've
Yeah.
gotten into the habit that you just drive to the best place for you rather than living where you work or
Hmm.
living where your church is. I mean, the idea of moving for a church so that you can be in proximity to a church is still pretty radical.
Yeah.
And the idea that, and there are very few churches that would reward that even. It's like, even if I do move for the church, who else is going to be there?
Yeah. That is interesting how like the commuter for work impacts that because then it makes me think about how both with COVID and just in general work from home has become so big. And then
Hmm.
I remember there was different circumstances of it around COVID, but for a while there was like a very big conversation about the legitimacy of virtual church kind of thing.
Right.
And does this count? And obviously COVID was a very different situation,
Hmm.
but that makes sense. Then that's corresponding with
Yep.
this really elevated virtual community kind of experience that we have now, where you can have that.
Right. And, there are now online monasteries that
Really?
you can
I've
have
never
this.
heard of that.
Yeah, check it out. There are several that
Hmm.
I know of that are like the online abbey or the abbey of the air, or something. More and more people are seeking some kind of spiritual community online because they can't find what they want in their geographic proximity, and
Yeah.
we've all realized that there are options. If you can't find what you want in person, try and find it on the
Yeah.
internet. And for some people, that's been a lifesaver. For people with disabilities, for example, who can't
Mm,
get out
yeah.
and get either to church or to other social things, that's a good thing. But if you're doing it by choice to
Yeah.
avoid that, it's a two-edged sword. It's, yes, it cuts some advantages for some people, but I think it also just the concept that if you don't like what's around you, you can just find something better online is really part of what's thinning
Mhm.
out in-person relationships.
Yeah.
But,
Well, and I
as
think
people do, we know each other because of online community. So
we
I'm going to
do.
be the
Look at
last
this.
person who says you shouldn't find community online because it's just
Yeah.
such a lifesaver for so many, particularly minority groups and people whose safety depends on not necessarily interacting
Yeah.
completely
Yeah.
with people around them geographically. But on the other
Well, I
hand,
mean,
it's tough.
oh, yeah. I mean, the queer community connections have so much been formed by the internet.
Mhm.
You know, and I think that's really interesting. But then there's also been it's been fascinating to watch. Obviously, I see it a lot in the Side B community, but in the broader queer Christian community as well, we go online because we don't know how to find anything around us, and is understandable. And then either we stay there because we don't have anything, or like my experience has been, I'm so disconnected from that like thing nowadays because of my local community.
Right.
And so and I think it's beautiful, but then it's also intriguing. What does that look like? And that's why I've loved like these kind of like local groups that have come apart, like your chapter, and
Mhm.
these things that are now giving people some of those connections in a physical embodied way.
Mhm.
Potentially, it's not always possible for where people are at, but yeah, finding physical connection in a virtual world is just crazy today.
Yeah, at its best, the internet connections, online connections can lead to in-person community. Like,
Yeah.
Side B online led to Revoice, led to local Revoice chapters,
Yeah.
and that's the ideal. And it will always be, I mean, for the foreseeable future, internet connection, online connections will be more accessible to people who are just coming out, just exploring, afraid to come out, or are just isolated geographically in one way or another.
Mhm. Yeah. It was a
Ideally,
lifeline for me in Colombia.
yeah.
So,
Oh, well,
yeah.
yeah. And
Yeah.
internationally as well. I mean, we can't even get into
Yeah.
that, but
Yeah.
because the risks and the dangers are so much higher in a lot of other places than they are here.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I think for intentional communities, being able to find other people who are interested in community, like our latest member came from Indiana. It's not
Hmm.
like it's going to be people from right around. You're not going to find people right around you who have these
Mhm.
niche values and willingness to commit. Except
Yes.
sometimes when God does funny things, like
Hmm.
puts my Revoice co-lead in a position to join us, or
Yeah. Yeah.
find these little tiny pockets of folks, and just they happen to, by the grace of God, find each other.
I mean, it's very similar. Like, one of the things I'll tell people with celibate partnerships is I truly believe, again, no research. This is just my thoughts. I truly believe that the biggest thing that breaks apart celibate partnerships is actually location.
Mm,
Because unless you are in a crazy, weird situation where you meet another celibate gay Christian who happens to fit all the criteria for you two to do life together in a
mhm,
partnership format, is rare.
mhm,
I've seen it happen, but it's rare. And so then you get into the point of, are you willing to move for each other?
mhm,
You know, are you willing to do that? Because it's just like it's rare to find it around you.
mhm.
And so the like online to then in person dynamic, even with committed friendships and celibate partnerships, I find it to be the biggest thing that what breaks them apart
Right.
is them going, no, neither one of us can move, or is, you know, for whatever reason.
Right. Yeah.
Hmm.
And that's just real. That's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
very difficult when you're a niche of a niche of a niche of a niche of a niche. It's just very difficult to make all the pieces fit together.
But I guess to leave people on a positive note, because I guess some of the things that I'm taking and I'm hoping people can take from this is, for those who are looking for more deep community, there's ways that you can either develop it slowly with who you are, or there's communities that are already doing it, like what
Mhm.
you guys are doing, that you can like get involved in and such.
Right. But again, it's a question of, are you willing to move for it?
Are
I
you
mean,
willing to move?
I had to move from Maryland to San Francisco to find my community.
Yeah.
Other people have moved from Indiana or from Texas, or how high a priority is it? And I
Hmm.
think one of the things that keeps our community together is that we keep our work lives as a very low priority.
Mm,
It's downright un-American, I know, but we
I
encourage
love
people
it.
only to work part-time and to keep and to keep our jobs at a lower priority than our church communal life. So a lot of our folks work in schools because you get way more time off in a school job than you do in any other job, even if it's a so-called full-time school job. Others of us just work part-time or work from home so that our time is flexible. So that's another value is, are you willing to put community ahead of your career? Are you able or willing to put community ahead of your biological family? And should you? I mean, intentional community is certainly not for everybody. If you have regular old community,
Community.
stick with your community. I think to some extent, intentional communities are replacements for what local churches and biological families should be doing, but aren't because those have failed. So they're kind of they're almost a prosthesis for church and biological family that's maimed. And that's a really harsh way to put it, but in some ways, I think
That's
it's
a good
accurate.
image, actually.
Now, that's over and against the image of a monastic community. So we joke that we're half a church and half a monastery because there's always been a call in the church for people who have dedicated their whole lives to the work and worship of it in the church. And that monastic calling is still valid and still happens. And if that's a whole different way of being called to intentional community. And it's a different kind of intentional community. If you think of yourselves as a monastery rather than, say, a family or a church, those are very different models, but all of which are valid. So that's another way to be called to into intentional community, is to be called to a monastic model. And there was a whole movement in the 90s called the New Monastics. And, that was Shane Claiborne and all Brian McLaren and people like that were talking about that. And it's been interesting to see what has come of that and how people are realizing that monasticism is hard. Making those kinds of commitments for a long term and forsaking a lot of the traditional American values is a hard thing.
Oh, yeah.
But
Yeah.
it has its rewards.
Yeah. It's reminding me of a phrase that I used in the Becoming Whole series about intimacy, which was that intimacy in community always require sacrifice in some way. I mean, even just the location thing, you're either you're sacrificing the flexibility to move away in order to stay with the people around you and accepting what is with you, accepting the people that are with you, or you're sacrificing where you're at to move towards that place, or you're sacrificing opportunities in work, like you were talking about, to be able to commit to it. Like, that's the challenge of it. But I do really love what you were explaining, how intentional community isn't necessary for everyone, but it is an opportunity for what the church and the biological family should be providing, but always isn't always.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you. We could literally be here for like another hour, knowing you and me, which just means you have to come back on.
Okay.
So,
Anytime.
yeah, absolutely. Great. Thanks everyone for listening. Really quickly, if anyone is interested in learning more about your church or you or whatever, how can they learn more about that?
Our church has a website, churchofthesojourners.org. And don't be confused with the organization Sojourners in D.C. We're the ones in San Francisco. And that's the best place to find this. I don't, have a blog or social media presence or anything like that. So.
Okay. Well, if you're interested in learning more about their community or even the things they do.
Also, if you're interested in learning about Christian community in general, there's an organization called the Nurturing Communities Network.
Okay.
Okay, and you can just Google them and you'll find we're part of that network and we do some work with them. So they have a lot of great resources for communities that are starting, or if you want to start a community, or if you want to connect with communities that are starting up.
Okay, sweet, cool. Well, look at those things. Thank you, everyone, for listening. As always, subscribe wherever you listen. Give us a review on YouTube or Spotify or Apple. You can go to holyourselves.org if you're interested in spiritual direction or cohorts. Usually, I put out a monthly newsletter on Substack because I'm writing so much. That's a little bit kind of wonky lately, but there is ones coming out, and I might be having some people write some stuff, guest writers on that as well. And as I said at the beginning, you can support the podcast by going to patreon.com/holy ourselves. Thank you, Lynn, for joining so
Thanks
much.
for asking me.
Yeah. And thank you also to the Transient Friends for our theme song. And until next time, we'll see you guys later. Bye, everyone.